Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of How She Moved the Music Notes. My name is Tila Pizzatella, and today we will be discussing the genre of soul and jazz, and artist Nina Simone. Nina Simone, known as the High Priestess of Soul, was a hard artist to classify. She was classically trained as a pianist who was also a songwriter and activist. She was most commonly known as a jazz singer, largely due to her masterful piano playing, but it was a title she deeply resented. Seeing it was a racial classification, her musical career transcended and formed several genres of music, including folk, jazz, blues, and protest music. No popular singer was more closely associated with the civil rights movement than Simone. To begin, I'll be discussing the genre of soul. Soul music is a new term for rhythm and blues. In the early 1950s to 1960s, African American communities all over the United States were taking the world by storm with the new sound of soul. The sound of soul was derived from the elements of gospel, rhythm and blues, and jazz. In blues clubs, street corners, and church halls, soul music was beginning to sweep the nation with its melodic instrumentals and soul-enticing vocals. Cities like Memphis, Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Los Angeles are commonly known for being the birthplaces of soul. Notable artists such as Ray Charles, who was known as the father of soul music, Patti LaBelle, who was known as the godmother of soul music, and artists like singer Mary Wells, who sang My Guy, or Etta James, who sang I'd Rather Go Blind and At Last, are all cornerstones to the beginning of soul music. As I said before, soul music was derived from elements of jazz. Here's a brief history about jazz. Jazz is described as a very rhythmic and forward momentum swing music. It uses bent or blue notes. This creates tremendous varieties in jazz music compositions. Musicians often play solo and make up music on the spot. This is known as call and response. Call and response is where one instrument or part of the band answers another. Jazz developed in the United States in the early part of the 20th century, and New Orleans played a key role in the development of jazz music. Jazz is mixed with African American musical traditions and blends of ragtime, marches, and blues. Jazz styles include traditional, swing, bebop, and cool jazz and jazz rock. Jazz is seen as a predominantly African American genre of music, and this association with the race is what angered Nina Simone most. She felt that her classification as a jazz singer was based largely on the fact that she was African American. In her autobiography, Simone said of the critics, "They finally ended up describing me as a jazz and something else. To me, jazz was a way of thinking, a way of being, and the black man in America was jazz in everything he did. In the way he walked, talked, thought, and acted. Jazz music was just another aspect of the whole thing. So in that sense, because I was black, I was a jazz singer. But in every other way, I most definitely was not." Before becoming the beloved songwriter and artist she was born Eunice Kathleen Wayman on February 21, 1933, in Tyrone, North Carolina. She was the sixth of 8 children born in her family. Her father was a barber, dry cleaner, and an entertainer. Her mother was a Methodist preacher. The family was very poor and lived in a racially segregated area in North Carolina. Simone began playing the piano at age 2.5. She was reported to have hopped on the piano and, like a little girl Mozart, played her mother's favorite hymn note perfect. The first song she learned was God Be With You Till We Meet Again. Nina's mother was a stern, distant minister who channeled her daughter into a life of musical excellence. By age 6, Simone was performing at church revivals and playing the organ and piano. At age 12, Simone was set to give a recital in the library. Her parents were seated in the front row but were asked to move to the back hall to make way for the white people. This happened in 1945 in North Carolina. Simone refused to play until her parents were moved back into the front, and she later said this incident inspired her work in the civil rights movement. She graduated from Tyrone's segregated high school and attended a private school in Asheville to continue her piano lessons. She dreamed of becoming a concert piano player. Simone spent the summer of 1950 at the Juilliard School as a student of Carl Friedberg, preparing for an audition of the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. Her application to Curtis Institute was denied. Only 3 of the 72 applicants were accepted that year. However, for the rest of her life, Simone would believe that she was rejected because she was African American. She would take private lessons from a renowned professor that gave lessons to other students to earn money. However, she aged out of being able to attend the Curtis Institute and had turned to performing publicly to pay her expenses. After being rejected from the Curtis Institute, Simone needed to make a living. She began performing publicly in Atlantic City in the early 1950s. While she was known as a piano player, one bar owner threatened to cut her pay unless she sang. She worked to earn money by performing popular songs in bars, and a sense of bitter disappointment infused her music. For her first gig in a dive bar in Atlantic City, Nina Simone played for drunken Irish bums dressed in a chiffon gown with full makeup and hair. This was the beginning of taking her diva role seriously. Since her strict conservative mother disapproved of Simone playing any music, like jazz or the blues, Eunice Wayman became Nina Simone, to remain undetected by her family. Nina was derived from the Spanish word Nina, which was given to her by a Spanish boyfriend of hers. Simone was taken from the French actress Simone Signoret. Nina Simone was born. Simone released I Loves You, Porgy from Porgy and Bess in 1958. This became her only top 20 Billboard hit in the United States. Her debut album, Little Girl Blue, was released the next year in 1959. It was a modest success, and she planned to move to a bigger audience and bigger paydays. In 1958, she befriended and married Don Ross, described as a sweet-talking white man who was both a beatnik and a fair-grounded barker. She realized that the marriage was a mistake and ended it quickly in 1959. She later described Ross in her autobiography as a guy who did nothing except hang out with his friends, drinking, smoking, and talking poetry, jazz, and all the usual beat bullshit. Simone moved to New York in 1957 and signed her first record contract without looking at the fine print. This mistake would cost her over $1 million in royalty wars. She mistakenly sold her rights for just $3,000. This began a career-long distrust and dislike for the business side of music for Simone. Simone signed with Colplex Records and released several studio and live albums. She was living in New York and became popular in demand at several live venues. In particular, she was discovered by the college students and hip crowd hanging out in Greenwich Village in New York City. The New York press went crazy over her, and she was hailed as a new star. The artistic and intellectual crowd who gravitated to Simone set the stage for her work in the United States civil rights movement. Gravitating around her were famous writers like Langston Hughes, James Baldwin, Lorraine Hansberry, and Dick Gregory. Politics and jazz music were combined. These friends set the stage for her most famous musical period, the civil rights movement. In 1961, Simone married Andy Stroud, a New York City policeman who came to Simone's musical performances and quickly attached himself to her. Stroud was a bit of a bully and had a reputation as a very tough, commanding vice cop. He quickly became Simone's, and according to the documentary What Happened, Miss Simone, he had planned to develop and grow her as an artist. He had a vision for her career. Simone commented on him, saying he was the best manager that she ever had. However, she also complained often that he worked her like a mule. However, his discipline pushed Simone to newer and greater commercial success. Simone and Stroud had one daughter, Lisa, born in September of 1962. However, her career did not stop during her pregnancy or her first child's birth. Stroud booked Simone on grueling tours of travel and performing. He created a vision board for her, saying if she wanted to be a rich black bitch, she had to work for it. Sadly, their marriage was very violent and filled with frequent arguments. Her biography, I Put a Spell on You, she details the brutal beating she endured from Stroud. He became jealous after she took a note from a fan, and Stroud accused her of infidelity. He beat her so badly that she had reached out to her guitar player, Al Shackman, to ask him to help her hide from Stroud for 2 weeks to heal from the brutal beating. The beatings continued throughout her marriage, and Simone both resented and was afraid of Stroud. She described him and his presence in her life by saying he wrapped around her like a snake. Stroud justified his violence, and he believed Simone wanted to be hit, and he believed that Simone needed a beating occasionally. Stroud was reportedly so jealous and possessive that he would not allow her to breastfeed their daughter. Simone unfortunately shared some of the same views and was quoted saying that Stroud had to beat her once to mobilize her out of depression. Later, though, Simone says that those beatings took a terrible toll on her and increased her feelings of depression, anger, and hopelessness. Simone herself had dramatic outbursts of anger, and she and Stroud often argued violently. Simone wrote in her diary in 1964, "Terribly tired and realize no one can help me. I am utterly miserable, completely miserably frighteningly alone." She was reported using sleeping pills and amphetamines to manage her schedule and lack of sleep. 1965 marked a turning point for Simone. Her friend Lorraine Hansberry died following a long battle with cancer. Simone was miserable in her marriage and career, thought often of suicide. She wrote in her diary, "I can't beat the poverty, the inferiority complex, the sex, and the show business." Simone's highest point of popularity and notoriety in the United States was with her recordings and activism around the civil rights movement. In 1961, she took part in American Society of African Culture conference in Lagos, Nigeria. This inspired her to become active in civil rights-related marches and events. This changed Simone's career in both positive and negative ways. Simone became involved in the civil rights movement, doing benefit concerts for groups like the Congress of Racial Equality and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating. Simone released her iconic protest song, "Mississippi Goddamn," in 1964 in reaction to the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church Committee. Simone was so angry and disgusted by the murder of these young girls that she wanted to take Simone was angry and disgusted by the murder of these 4 girls that she wanted to take a violent action against the men who killed them. However, her husband reminded her that she was no killer and urged her to stick to music. So she wrote "Mississippi Goddamn." Simone stated that "Mississippi Goddamn" was her first civil rights song and came to her in a rush of fury, hatred, and determination. Simone performed after the 1965 march in Selma, Alabama. Simone said that her work in the civil rights was her passion and that her anger about discrimination sustained her. Simone believed that the artist's role was to change society. She at first did not worry about the consequences of her work in civil rights because she had to live with it first. She said simply, "I cannot try." Simone's worldview was altered most by the time she spent with Lorraine Hansberry. Hansberry was an activist and playwright who wrote "A Raisin in the Sun" and who also the movement, the handbook for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. The two would spend weekends together talking for hours about black identity and revolutionary politics. After Hansberry's death, Simone and Weldon Irvin turned an unfinished play by Hansberry into a famous civil rights song, "To Be Young, Gifted, and Black," was released as a single and became a staple song of the Black Pride movement. When thinking back on this period, Simone said, "I felt more alive because I was needed, and I could sing something to help my people." Simone left the United States as a bitter and angry person. She was disgusted by the assassination of Martin Luther King and what she saw as the death of the United States civil rights movement. She was also angry that she was boycotted by certain music venues for her work in the civil rights, and she was angry about the loss of fame and opportunities. She flew first to Barbados in 1970. Stroud was still her husband at this time and business manager. She left her wedding ring on the dresser and left. He took her departure as an indication of her desire for a divorce. He remained in charge of Simone's money. She saw the departure as a long overdue break from years of grueling traveling and performing. She thought Stroud would continue to manage her and revive her career and would contact her when he lined up the next performance, but he never did. She recorded her last album in 1974 and performed sporadically and erratically in public for many years. For the next 20 years, she lived and moved to many different places, including Liberia, Barbados, and Switzerland, eventually ending up in Paris and south of France. She would perform in small nightclubs, often for little money. She was sometimes brilliant and sometimes too drunk to sing properly. Critics noted that her voice had deteriorated at this time. In the early 1980s, Simone was found living in a filthy apartment alone and very little money. Old friend Al Shackman and her manager at the time, Raymond Gonzalez, intervened and helped her get an apartment in the Netherlands. They also helped her get medical and mental health treatment, as Simone was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was prescribed trilofan, a medicine to treat mood disorders and schizophrenia. She released her autobiography, "I Put a Spell on You," in 1991, which provided intimate details into her life and career. She lived the last years of her life in southern France in relative anonymity and was diagnosed with breast cancer and passed away at home in April 2003. Simone's diagnosis of bipolar disorder came after years of aggressive outbursts and anger, often displayed while performing. Her anger and violent temper led to the estrangement from her daughter Lisa. Lisa had come to live with Simone in Liberia but could not stand the emotional outbursts and physical abuse from her mother. Simone had several high-profile bursts of anger, including one shooting at a record executive that she believed stole money from her. These incidents highlighted her need for psychiatric care, which she eventually received. While her own career success varied, Nina Simone has been called one of the most influential recording artists of the 20th century, jazz, cabaret, and R&B. Countless musicians have credited to their success from Nina Simone's tone and style. Artists such as Elton John, Aretha Franklin, Adele, Patti LaBelle, and many more. Simone was nominated for 4 Grammys and won a Grammy Hall of Fame award for her interpretation of I Loves You, Porgy. She was awarded 2 honorary doctoral degrees in music, one from the Amherst College and one from the Malcolm X College, and preferred to be called Dr. Nina Simone after receiving these awards. In 2018, Simone was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Mary J. Blige provided her introduction. In 2021, Simone was inducted into the National Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. In a most bittersweet moment, the Curtis Institute of Music, which rejected Nina Simone's application in 1950, awarded her an honorary doctorate in music and humanities in 2003. She died 2 days later. In the book She Bop, A Definitive History of Women in Music, author Lucy O'Brien summed up Simone in this way. Until her death in 2003, Simone's life seemed to be one long erratic saga of being misunderstood. A one-time classical musician, she should have been a world-famous concert pianist, but instead poverty and prejudice led her to the pop world in a show business format that was never taxing enough for her. Her life story is packed with should-have-beens. She should have been America's first black classic pianist, but the only realistic route open for a poor, unknown black girl in the 1950s was supper club swing or a strong dose of the blues. She should have been happily married, but the rigors of the road left her with 2 failed marriages and a sting of abandoned lovers. In the words of Miss Maya Angelou, she described Simone after her death that she wished Simone was still here to inspire us with her music, her incisive words, and her unrelenting commitment to truth and justice. Angelou is quoted saying, "She is loved or feared, adored or disliked, but few who have met her music or glimpsed her soul react with moderation." With that being said, thank you all for listening to episode 1 of How She Moved the Music Notes discussion on jazz, soul, and Nina Simone. My name is Tila Pizzatella, and tune in for the next episode where we will be discussing the genre of country music and Shania Twain. Bye-bye.